Hello to everybody all over the world, and please say hello in the chat if you like and tell us where you are from. I'm happy to see you all again. People are still coming in, and I'm very much happy to welcome Lisa Romero today. And she just said normally her home base is Australia, but now she is for a while in Ireland and speaking from Cork in Ireland now to us. And her main topic, with many publications, many books, and many lectures and courses she's offering, is about meditation and the inner pathway of anthroposophy mainly. This is the crucial point for her. And today she's going to speak about the relationship between inner development and the work as a teacher in the light of current challenges. So I think this is the first time we have a topic like this, which is question of inner development and meditation addressed in the International Campus Waldorf. And as I see, you are really an expert in that field, Lisa. And I'm happy to have you with us. And thank you for being with us. And please start your talk.
Thank you. I just to let you all know that I have two colleagues with me today, Megan Witchery and Seamus Maynard. Megan's a teacher and has started an initiative called the Phoenix Project in the States, in upstate New York. And Seamus works in many schools throughout Australia and America. And he's a speech and drama teacher. So they will be bringing some of the content alive in their way. Well, yes, inner development for teachers. I've done a lot of work with a lot of programs and various schools, and I've written books because of the work I've done with teachers, primarily because it's so vital in our times to understand how we bring an education that can really feed the longings of the soul life of the child. And it's through our own inner development that we really are able to awaken that. So in my contemplation for what to bring today, I thought a really strong verse came in this morning that I wanted to share, which will be, in a sense, the principle behind this presentation. This is from Rudolf Steiner. It says this: out of the gravity of our times must be born the courage to act. Give to teaching what the Spirit gives you, and you will free humankind from the crushing mountain of materialism bearing down on it. It's quite something, isn't it? Give to teaching what the Spirit gives you. Now, I'm looking out into the audience, and obviously there's some what we called old hat teachers, people that have been in the process for a while. And there will be lots of teachers that are very new to Waldorf education. But we're always, are given this question: how do we make it alive through us? How does it come into a living process so I'm not really just a passing on the dogma or having to believe the dogma of what is given to me? Because we know for a fact that Rudolf Steiner himself was able to come to this picture, that he gave to teaching what the Spirit gave him. And so we are called in a way as educators to ask, how are we able to do that in and through ourselves? And at the same time, we rely upon this wealth of wisdom that has been given to us through Waldorf education, but then finding ways of which we really can give ourselves to it. Now, there are many exercises that can be done that actually open up our inner capacities, which allow us to be different in our work. allow us to be different in our inner life. And it is these capacities that inner development awakens that really allows us to come to this reality where I may give to teaching what the Spirit gives me. How do we open ourselves so that something may be a part of this living relationship to the spiritual world? Because we're 100 years on in Waldorf education, and the problems of our age are different. And yet that same verse rings so true for today, the crushing mountain of materialism. So in this time where materialism seems to be striking a stronger hold, not just in our trajectory of our everyday life, but in the interior life of the human being, we are really looking at children that are anxious, that are displaced, that don't have foundational expressions of health in the soul that allow them to even learn in the classroom at times. And so we're up against a force of materialism that is penetrating the nervous system of the child. That means their senses are not as intact. And if their senses are not intact, then they are lacking in the ability for attention, attachment, and self-regulation. And if your children haven't got that by the time they're in class 1, then they're not going to be able to learn in the common way of which learning takes place. The ability to have attention to what is taking place. Attachment, meaning I can engage with, be enfolded in this group, with the teacher, with the group, with what's actually being brought as content, and to be able to regulate themselves. And so we're seeing an enormous amount of diagnostic labels for the children because these 3 things are missing as materialism penetrates the nerve sense system, and they struggle just to take hold of this bodily vehicle, which will allow them to participate wholly in the world. So we ourselves, hopefully, have some connection to these words of attention, attachment, and self-regulation. Because if as educators we don't have that in us, we can't take the next step. Attention is required for inner development. So is attachment, so is to self-regulate. But they're done in a different way when we turn inwardly, when we find this inward looking that's essential to begin to open up capacities within us in which the Spirit may speak in. Now, spiritual forces are streaming through the world all the time. And Stanley gives this beautiful picture at the time where materialism at its greatest, the greatest spiritual forces ever that will to enter into human life are trying to enter it. But it is us, in the way of which we think, the way of which we engage in our inner world, which blocks those forces from entering in. So if I really want to know what does this child need, what capacity do I use? What does this class require now? What capacity am I using? Am I coming from some script that's been handed down from a teacher, even a well-regarded teacher? Or am I able to look into this group today, this child today, and actually have insight, even revelation of what they will need in order to bring about the greatest health and benefit so that they may do what Waldorf education is founded on, that they may, as adults, unfold their freedom. I have a bit of a passion about this. That's why when anyone says to me, will you work with some teachers? I always say yes, because this is the future. And what we give in that classroom is going to make a difference. Now, on one hand, your inner development allows you to connect with something beyond just your personal particular self. Many teachers have senses of that, experiences of that. Sometimes it's incredibly clear. Then other times we feel like we are just really groping in the dark, doing what we're told to do, trying to find the right form, rather than finding this living connection, which only can happen if I'm in a living inner space. Now, that's, a big ask. And yet there is also that privilege in being an educator of children, because so many spiritual forces come with them that often we're supported. How many times do you go to a classroom thinking, I've got no energy, but in front of those children, something lifts up, something comes in to give to them, and you're able to get through whatever it is that you yourself were struggling with. So when Wilder Steiner gave that image that you hang your personal particular self outside the classroom before you enter in, he had confidence you had something else to go in with. So who goes in if your personal particular self is hung outside? And how do we deepen our relationship to that? So not only does that capacity grow, which allows us to receive something from the Spirit, what it also does is it enriches our inner life in such a way that we can stand behind what we're delivering. Now, I know that we can't love everything we teach, but if we could love it a little bit, we have united ourselves with it. And when we unite ourselves with what we're bringing, we bring a different substance to the space. If you're giving information from your intellect to the children's intellect, it is what I call whiteboard education. And inner development does that as well. And that's why it's so important for educators, because you're not just asking what does that child need, but how do I bring myself in relationship to the content that needs to be conveyed, this particular main lesson? How do I unite myself with it in such a way that it comes across not as just intellectual thought, not just content and information, because computers can do that all very well, information in, information out, but that we create, sculpt deeper inner soul spaces through those main lessons. And I've met many Waldorf children that have grown up and still feel the echo of those seeds that were planted in their classroom. Such rich, unfolding experiences of their interior world. But that's getting harder for us today, because not only are the children being bombarded in their sensory system, in their nervous system, but we are also being bombarded. The bureaucracy of the school makes us have to do a lot more stuff that fills up our inner life, that is not about living education. The circumstances that are confronting us from around the world, it makes it actually stand in front of those children and giving everything you've got to give a lot harder. And we often think, I don't have time for inner work because I've hardly got time to do my class preparation. But actually, once you sense what it can give you, what you can glean from it and what you can then give to the children from it, you'll realize, as many, many teachers do, you don't have time not to do your inner work, because it is almost a necessity. Well, it is a necessity of our times. In fact, Steiner said that we would recognize this. So I want to start with some very simple inner work pictures so that we can come to get a little glimpse of what it helps for us. And as I said, there are many different exercises. Some of those meditations and those meditative exercises are to really bring us through a path of our own evolution. And some are really focused more strongly on working with others or the task at hand. But whenever we are doing inner work, it's always useful to find the right gesture that allows whatever exercise we're doing to bear fruit. It's very easy to do inner work with that part of yourself that we see you should have hung up outside the classroom, that personal particular self, where we are kind of running verses in our head, like a child sometimes does with their daily verse. They're not really living behind it. They're not giving themselves to it. And when we do inner work that way, it actually doesn't bear its fruits, because the exercises themselves require a dynamic relationship between what the exercise can cultivate in us, but what we give of ourselves to it, so that that makes it possible. So I'm just going to bring a few which are kind of foundational and basic, but at the same time, they're essential because they allow us to find the right place in our being of which all inner work can take place. Whether it is contemplation, a riddle of the circumstances of the world, or a particular issue that's going on in the classroom, we have to find a way of not having our everyday thinking, which thinks the same thoughts all the time. Stanford University just did a research on this, that 90% of your thoughts every day are exactly the same. Just going over them again and again and again and again. It's not a state of living thinking. It's just a habitual thought process. And then, of course, a lot of our thinking is not our thinking at all, but something else is thinking us. 99.9% of our thoughts are just coming out of our relationship to the environment. So if we're going to find what the Spirit gives us, we have to come into a different inner place in us. Now, of course, it's true that you can have insights that just drop in. And in fact, I haven't heard the story that one of the teachers was asked by Steiner, how's your meditative practice going? And the teacher said, oh, no, it's not so good. You know, I don't seem to be getting anywhere. I'm not really getting any other experiences that I think I should be having. And he said, well, how's it going with the children in the classroom? Oh, well, that's extraordinary. Whenever I need something, there's the right thought. Here's what I need. And he said, there is the results of your meditation. So when we work inwardly, when we work meditatively, when we work with our contemplation, when we work with inner development, we may not see the results in that place of which we want to see them, where we can say for ourselves, absolutely, the spiritual world is with me in this moment, because something is thinking in me, a wiser stream of thought is entering in my thinking. We may not be able to say that there. We may not be able to say that there after 7 months of meditation, but it does happen actually. But what does take place, and this is something very important, is that it does start to change how the spiritual world works with us. We seem to be more available for those insights, for what the other needs. So I'm going to do a few little exercises here to sort of get us into understanding the right relationship to those things. And when I say the right relationship to them, well, you know, it's a bit like going to a gymnasium. If you went to the gym and you've never seen a bell, but a weight in your life, you've never seen a gym weight in your life, and you went in and you've got all these weights and you know they're going to build muscles, it's useful to know how to use them to build the right muscle that you want to use. It's useful to know that you pull it in this direction, but you don't just kind of swing it around your head and hope for this particular muscle to grow. And so there are certain sort of key supports that can help us understand where we orientate in ourselves so that the exercises bear fruit. It's also useful to know what the exercise is trying to develop in us. Often we don't know that. We take on these exercises with a certain amount of faith, and that is also very useful. But if we don't know what we're trying to grow as a capacity, or how to move these exercises in such a way that they will build the muscle that we were looking for, then we could be delaying ourselves, maybe even wasting time. And unfortunately, I've had some people come up to me and say, I've been doing this exercise for 20 years incorrectly. And they wonder why anthroposophical meditation isn't bearing results. It always bears results. So I'm going to start with some very basic processes just so that we can move ourselves and understand some of the foundational kind of movements that are needing to take place. But I want to start with something that actually can help us understand why the nerve sense system, that obviously is the foundations of that are laid in early childhood, but are carried throughout the whole school time, because the care and development of them is helping more than just the bodily vehicle come into a health expression. It's allowing their consciousness to take hold in a way where it is in harmony with themselves, and therefore can be in harmony with the world around them. So let's try an exercise first. This is very simple. It's just looking at the sense of touch. So I'm suggesting that you do this with me, and you take a piece of cloth. I'm going to use the cloth here on my top, and rub the cloth between your fingertips. If you could do this so you can actually experience this, because you're going to need to do a few little maneuvers here. Now, with this sense of touch, you want to feel what the quality of this fabric is like. I don't want you to name it. Oh, it's like this, it's like that, it's cotton, it's wool, I'm an anthroposophist, it's definitely a natural fibre. No, nothing like that. It's not about that. It's just put your attention into the sensation of the cloth. And now, without changing what you're doing, just keep it very scientific, don't change what you're doing. Now move your attention to your fingers that are touching the cloth, feeling the cloth. Now you may realize that's an interesting shift. I move my attention, my fingers come to the foreground, the cloth moves to the background slightly. I can push now my attention back into the cloth. So attention here is held upon the sensory process, but moved by my inner will. But it's using the sensory system for us to have this awareness of it in this point of the exercise. Now, this is interesting. Nearly all of the senses allow something of this. Attention, self-other relationship. And so therefore we know that it awakens something of our own consciousness within this bodily vehicle of which can enter into the world. But for the sake of this exercise, we're just looking at what is going on in the realm of attention. What in me moves my attention? You know, we live in an attention economy. They know it's an important power. Everyone knows that attention is powerful. If you can't move your attention, if you don't have it in your own hands, that makes life very difficult for you. That makes your freedom very difficult for you. That makes it very difficult for the child to learn. And yet this force is being harvested in our world today. So attention is really important to come back into your hands, to will in your way. Now, to do this inner work, we have to really get this attention active within. And I want to take us to another step with this, because I think sometimes we understand what that means, but we have to really get a sense for it so I can orientate myself. So I often use the world. The world pulls my attention. It's this thing that affecting this part of me. But now I have to move my attention out of myself. So now with this next exercise, we'll close our eyes. And we're going to move our attention now through the eyes. So I want you to look through the closed eyes towards the space in front of you. And then I want you to look backwards with the eyes into the inner space. And you might notice there is a little bit of a shift in the quality. When I look forward with my eyes to the space in front of me, now I'm looking inward with my eyes, then there's a slightly different quality. Now the place of your attention for inner development is inward looking, but you're not using your body. So closing your eyes, feel that attention that happens when I'm inward looking, but soften the eyes. Ignore, in fact, put the physical body to one side, and just the presence of your attention in your interior space. That is the place of which we start contemplation from. There. Now, when we engage with contemplation and we do it in our way, and often with our personal self, we often have the same thoughts, or we have a whole load of thoughts that affirm our belief, or our already existing belief systems. So you can't contemplate anything new in that place. If you want to experience what Rudolf Steiner refers to as living thinking, first you have to be able to think for yourself. That's a given. And that's really important, the ability to think for yourself, which means putting your will into your thought processes. And I won't go into those details because that's almost a given that every teacher can think for themselves. But now we're going to another step where we want to be able to hold up what we call brain thinking and contemplate in this space where a living thought might enter. And the space of which we enter into that contemplation is with our attention, not focused on the body, but purely inward looking. And with that attention inward looking, we then start with a very simple contemplation. This is one of the archetypes that Rudolf Steiner gave. Wisdom lives in the light. Now, it's important to begin with, if you want to develop this capacity, to take a thought that streams from esoteric schooling, because in its nature, it can only be answered in relationship to the spiritual world. You cannot answer, you cannot pose this question to the sensory world, the world of science. In the world of science, it's not wisdom that lives in the light. It's electromagnetic waves, it's particles, it's photons. And it might be very interesting to understand photons and interesting to know about how many photons arise from the heart or into the brain. All those things are very fascinating for us, but they don't produce a living relationship to the spiritual thought processes. So we have to engage our interior world with a thought that can only really be answered by the spiritual world. And it's not really to find that answer, it's to hold back brain thinking, which is bound to your senses, which is bound to the external world, which is bound to the external you. And look inwards to this place where you may begin to have a thought life where something lands in that is beyond what you yourself could think. Now, don't expect that in meditation. The preparation, the actual doing of it, the doing of this contemplation of wisdom lives in the light, as simple as it is, it starts to build that faculty of living thinking. Living thinking requires that you can think for yourself. Imaginative consciousness requires that you've got the ability for living thinking, because it's the step between. And living thinking happens to us, but often we do not know about it. And sometimes we think it's just us being clever. And sometimes you have these real good insights and you're like, oh gosh, I'm just, well, God, I really know my stuff. I'm so on the ball today. Rather than actually realize our relatedness to the spiritual world. Because when we know from where it comes, we can also know that somehow we have to be able to serve that thought, bring that, give to teaching what the Spirit gives you. And it builds our living relationship to this some wiser being thinks with me. And of course, we could ponder about who that wiser being is. Is that my angel? Is that the angel of the child? What is it that brings this new thought? But to begin with, we have to develop the capacity, and we use a statement not that pops up from our own consciousness, although there are so many wisdom-filled thoughts that Rudolf Steiner has given, and of course you could use something else, but when we are certain about the nature of a thought and it's what it wants to build in us, what's the doorway that it wants to open? Because this is the doorway to experiencing our own I. Not our everyday self, but that free spiritual being, the eternal I. But it comes through this process. Now, once we have an ability, and it is an ability, to just turn within and to have this space, we begin to be able to utilize our inner world as a more objective instrument. And I say that knowing that that's hard for people necessarily to grasp in our times, and we can see the world around us is becoming extraordinarily affected by our subjectivity. If you speak something that offends somebody, then you're no longer to speak that thing. The subjectivity of our inner world is growing when it could becoming more of an instrument to really experience the world. So I want to just try this moment where we find this place of inward looking. Yes, you have a bodily vehicle, but you're not using your body. Your eyes should not be what focuses your attention, but it gives you the ground of which you can understand the quality of attention that's inward looking. And that attention, when you close your eyes and build it, there it's in that place that we place the thought that actually calls upon something living from the spiritual world. And this particular thought is wisdom lives in the light. So we'll give that a go just for a couple of minutes, because I want to see if that helps you to understand being able to be more objective inwardly. We hear it a lot. Contemplate this, contemplate this. And yet, we haven't necessarily found the inner space of which this real contemplation takes place. You know, Einstein had that ability, but not everybody contemplates. But here, things can wake up to us that can't wake up to us unless we are in the realms of the spirit. So contemplation creates an internal space which is also quieter. If your contemplation is rushed and hurried and the rhythm is more like the intellect, then you're probably not orientating yourself into that place of quiet, contemplative space, where you're not relying on just those thoughts that stream from the brain thinking, although, of course, they want to be there. That's why we hold them up with this wisdom-filled thought. Wisdom lives in the light. Once you're able to do that, then you'll begin to recognize that when you're contemplating other things, new thoughts might arise. But it also gives us an ability to experience our interior world differently. Most of us are faced with what I refer to as the industrialized interiority. It's like everything that has gone on in the outer world has cluttered up this inner space. And to find that ability to put all of that to one side, to put your everyday self to one side, every day for 5 minutes a day is the most rewarding thing, because until the everyday self is to one side, we won't get that clarity of what we're working with inwardly. And if we do have that clarity, then we can be informed about the world in a different way. Now, you may already have a certain soul sensitivity, and that soul sensitivity allows you to experience what is coming to you from the sensory world. But it's also important to withhold your judgments, to allow what's speaking from the world to speak without us interpreting it through our personal selves, and rather see what is it really trying to pull upon the interior world. What what is working in that? So I'm going to ask Meg if she would help us with this. I would ask everybody to do this exercise as a way of sensing how you are experiencing these two different songs. She's going to bring two different songs in and try to withhold the judgment around them, but watch how they move us inwardly. Now, to do this, again, I'm going to ask us everyone to close their eyes, to find that quietness of your attention, but at the same time to focus yourself on your interior space. What moves? How does it move with these different songs? And when you're ready, Meg, please.
As time goes by so slowly, and time can do so much, are you still mine? I need your love. I need your love. Godspeed your love to me.
Thanks, Meg. Now, our inner instrument is generally moved by music, it's moved by songs. But what it shows us is that if we don't judge it, we could just see where is that song taking me? What does it want to draw from me? And when I really grasp this capacity within, we can start to begin to understand some of what we do in the classroom. Why, for instance, we would have pentatonic scale to a certain age of child is really important. When would you bring in child development, a very different type of song? Why wouldn't you bring that in too early? Now you could follow it as wrote, as told, when you do what song when, without having to ever sense into and use your own capacity to see how it's affecting you. And therefore understand how it was affecting the consciousness of the child at certain stages of child development. And this is a very important instrument to develop in ourselves, because if we were able to develop it, we would also be far more discerning about what we're doing. Not just that we don't have to pass on what someone else has told us to do, but a discernment around, well, why would I do this particular song in this particular class? Is it healthy, needed, hygienic for this group, this age child? But that requires something of your own inner development, not to be a singer yourself, but to have that instrument that can recognize it. Meg, did you want to mention that, or give an example of a couple of those school songs that might happen at different ages?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. Lisa calls me Meg. My name's Megan. You can also call me Meg, though. Yeah, I'd be happy to. I think maybe I'll just give the experience and then speak a bit about it. So I might just take my video off so you don't have to watch me do it, but can listen to it. So we'll start with the younger child with that pentatonic picture. Just go into that experience a little bit. Good morning, golden sunshine. You're looking through my window fine. And I might just move to the next one so we have that comparison within first and then speak about it a little bit. There may be a train coming near my house, so just listen past all those notes for the ones I'm trying to bring through. Smoothly glide, thou stream of life, thou stream of life, free from envy, free from strife, free from envy, free from strife. Smoothly glide, thou stream of life, thou stream of life, free from envy, free from strife, free from envy, free from strife. There's the train. Yeah, so I sang that second one through twice just to also really give that experience of how different the movement is inwardly in that song. And so part of what Lisa's bringing and what my experience is in working with these principles of inner development in relationship to the content of what we're bringing as educators, that music is really a useful teacher in this, is that there's both the movement of the music itself, so the melody, how the notes are organized, but also there's the pictures and the words, which connect to the imagination of the child. So their soul development in relationship to that picturing consciousness. So in the first one, good morning, golden sunshine, there's this bringing up through the pentatonic notes. And if you haven't heard of that before, it's coming really for the early childhood, but in those early classes, class 1 and 2, we're really looking at this, bridging the children from this place of the spiritual world, of this unity with the spiritual world in a harmonious way. And so when we bring things like the pentatonic scale, which has as its law harmony, so there's nothing discordant in that scale. And you can experiment with this. It's a simple scale, 5 notes. And within that, we can really support this bridging from this early childhood into the grades and the classes of the middle years of childhood. And so in class 1 and 2, we're really looking for that bridge to be taking place, and the music can reflect that. So in the song, we have both this reaching towards the heavens and the ascending of the scale, going up into the sun itself. And then we have it coming all the way back down at the end. And it's kind of this picture of incarnating through the notes themselves from the cosmic periphery into this individual experience of humanness, which has a separateness to it. And then in the next song, you can hear how the melody shifts, the movement shifts, and we get different pictures. Free from envy, smoothly glide, thou stream of life. Free from envy, free from strife. And that's really the picture of the child once they've crossed through the 9-year change, and they have this experience of that humanness, of that separateness now within their interior space. And that results in whole new experiences of the world and themselves. And so the music and really all of the curriculum and everything that we bring can only land into that space once they've really crossed over that bridge. And the 9-year change is kind of that point where they're passing from the bridge into the earthly world. And so the picture of strife and envy even entering the consciousness of the child prior to that moment would have actually a discordant effect on the child's consciousness because of the nature of how they're growing and developing. So in light of what's been said today, it seems important just to recognize that how and in what way we understand those moments in a child's development can help us respond out of our inner understanding of, say, a piece of music or anything else that we're bringing in front of the children. Let's bring that.
Thanks, Maeve. And I think it's important to marry this understanding of why it's so useful to do in the development, because your relationship to the curriculum then becomes really alive in you, that you get it, not just you have the information, but you really now I understand it, because I have the instrument in me that's being affected. Now, I want to also, before we run out of the time, is ask Seamus if he would bring a piece here now. Now, this is not a piece for the younger years, but more a piece for us to experience in. Now, I asked Seamus to do this. We've been working together for many years. It's not an easy thing for an actor who really can do something well to do it not well. But I want us to also experience what I was saying before, and that is that when we unite ourselves with what we're bringing, and we can do so more because we have this richness of our own inner world through our own inner development, we can bring some greater substance to the children other than just the information. It's Seamus is now going to show us this through doing a Shakespeare piece, a small Shakespeare piece twice. One, in the way that he is able to just bring it to you from his memory. And then the second piece where he's able to, or you can do it the other way around, Seamus, I'll leave it to you to decide which way around you do it, which is the most advantage. And the second piece where he really lets himself come into the work. And I'm sure you've experienced this yourself with teachers. Are they just teaching out of their intellect, out of information? They've read something, they're just spitting it back out. You know, we know now that computers do that better than us. Let's leave that to computers. They do that better than us. What I want from a teacher is, have you ensouled this? How will I know if you've ensouled what you're bringing? Is because you'll be bringing more than information. And how do we ensoul anything? We have to have this inner space. Inner development means we deepen our inner spaces too. And we actually take the content in and bring that through us out of our own living experience. And as I mentioned before, you can't love everything that you teach, but even if you can unite yourself with some aspects of it, it alters what you're bringing to that space. And in a sense, you're doing that same thing that you're bringing to teaching what the Spirit gives you, because it's in the loving, uniting ourselves with it, that we're filling up that content with more than just what needs to be conveyed as information. And of course, we know that the curriculum offers so much already for us. But the children of today need us to be right in there with what we're bringing. So without saying any more, I'll just let Seamus write to give you that experience.
Okay, yeah. We'll do the way that Lisa said, so I'll do which is a little bit harder, but I think it's useful, and we could do it the other way, but let's do it. So I'll do the information version first. To be or not to be? That is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles and, by opposing, end them. To die, to sleep, no more, and by a sleep to say we end the heartache and the 1,000 natural shocks that flesh is heir to. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished, to die, to sleep, perchance, to dream. Aye, there's the rub. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil must give us pause. There's the respect that makes calamity of so long life. For who would bear the whips and scorns of time, the oppressor's wrong, the proud man's contumely, the pangs of disprized love, the law's delay, the insolence of office, and the spurns that patient merit of the unworthy takes, when he himself might his quietus make with a bare bodkin? Just a little bit of that. To be or not to be. That is the question. whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles and by opposing end them, to die, to sleep, no more, and by a sleep, to say we end the heartache and the 1,000 natural shocks that flesh is heir to. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished, to die, to sleep, perchance to dream. Aye, there's the rub, for in that sleep of death, what dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil must give us pause. There's the respect that makes calamity of so long life. For who would bear the whips and scorns of time, the oppressor's wrong, the proud man's contumely, the pangs of disprized love, the law's delay, the insolence of office, and the spurns that patient merit of the unworthy takes, when he himself might his quietus make with a bare bodkin? Who would fardels bear to grunt and sweat under a weary life, but that the dread of something after death, the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler returns, puzzles the will and makes us rather bear those ills we have than fly to others that we know not of. Thus conscience does make cowards of us all, and thus the native hue of resolution is sicklied o'er with the pale cast of thought, and enterprises of great pith and moment with this regard their currents turn awry and lose the name of action. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you.
Thanks, Seamus. The reason I really felt the usefulness of bringing these exercises is to understand that inner development is not about navel gazing, navel gazing. It's not about a sort of removal from life. Indeed, we go into this inner place, this contemplative place, so that we can actually be enriched with all that makes life more true, more beautiful, more good. It enriches us to have this relationship to the spiritual world, and it enriches the work that we do because we're in a different relationship to it. And it's extraordinary to think that a teacher rarely sees the fruits of their labor, because it's not until those young people are grown and they are standing in the ground of their own inner development, do many of the seeds that you laid down, many of the foundations and structures which allows them that freedom to build within start to really grow and develop. So it's interesting that we're giving so much in childhood for something you won't necessarily see come to fruition. But that is part of the love of the work. So our first step is to find this inner, quiet, contemplative space. To find a place of peace and tranquility that allows us to begin to work in a different way than from the way the sensory world calls upon us. We use a thought like wisdom lives in the light, ideally something that is tried and tested, not something that popped up for your imagination or something you just like, but rather something that we know holds back that sensory natured thinking and begins to create a capacity where something else might be able to awaken in us. And at the same time that we are working on that space, we begin to find that there is more ways of which we can unite ourselves with the work that we're carrying. Because in that inner space, in that inner developed space, we are growing the very thing that we want to lay down in the child's inner world. That is the richness, the fullness, the depth of what's possible. We don't want children just to think what we think. We want them to know how to think. We don't want them to feel what we think they should feel. We want them to have that depth of capacity where their feeling instrument is an experiencing instrument. And when it's clear in that way, where they can experience the world around them, they become far more discerning about what they're doing, what they're taking into themselves. The great challenges that you face now as the teacher is that all of this foundation is being blunted or disturbed by the technology that's in their environment, even if it's not in their environment, because it has now become so ingrained in the collective consciousness. And we don't want to necessarily block that reality, but find what will help us meet it healthily. The more we're pulled to the peripheral self, the more we must deepen our inner self. The more we must support these deeper spaces within the child. Not superficial thought, but depth of thought. Not superficial likes and dislikes, but really allowing these stories and the curriculum to work them. But how do we bring it to them? That means that that realm in us also needs to be there. We need to have some living experience where we've united ourselves with it. We can really see the difference of what happens to Shakespeare when it comes through the head or when it comes through the whole being. And of course, Shakespeare is always good, but some other substance comes across. I was following Seamus with that second one in a way that I couldn't follow him inwardly with the first one. Or there was nothing to follow in the first one in the same way. So I'm very aware that there are very many meditations or contemplations that can be done. But it is really being aware of how important it is to do it. On one hand, inner development can feel like you're in a gymnasium and you are just pulling weights. But as long as you know what you're pulling and why you're pulling it, muscles will grow. On the other hand, inner development is really like entering into a temple, where with reverence you go into this place where you begin to open up to your own communion, your own meeting with something that is beyond your everyday self. But we are also at a stage in our evolution where inner development is also like being in a lab. We have to make those decisions ourselves. We have to see, how am I doing with that exercise? Can I actually think for myself? Do I come to a place of quietness? Am I able to find this quality? Can I recognize a wisdom-filled thought that is coming and thinking with me? And as we work with that, we bring about a certain amount of ability to assess ourselves and see where we need to keep growing. Now, this is a very introductory process. I'm very glad to be bringing something to give an insight of why inner development is so important, because it isn't about just you having a bit of inner quiet. It builds a relationship to the spiritual world, which enriches your soul life, which builds your ability to what you can give to the world around you. And so it's useful to know that the path of inner development as given through Rudolf Steiner is inner development for world development. It's not inner development so I can get off the real, the cycles of life and death, so I can get the hell out of Dodge. It's not inner development so I can get off of this place. It's actually inner development for world development. It's knowing that every step I take has an impact on the collective environment around me. Why Rudolf Steiner gives these pictures. Your thoughts and feelings are as important to the world as your actions. So I want to now work a little bit with this picture of inner development in the lab by giving one other exercise. Let us, first of all, do this exercise that I've already worked with Wisdom Lives in the Light, where we take a couple of minutes to find that orientation of attention and then bring this statement as the center of our thoughts, and in a contemplative way engage with that wisdom-filled thought. Just do that for a couple of minutes, and then I want to bring another exercise so you can really see how different exercises work you differently. Let's try that one first. Okay, now for your own insight, I want to now bring a very different exercise so you can recognize how the exercises have an intention to work with you differently and actually produce different results. And this is a very different exercise. I'll just read it to you from Rudolf Steiner's words. It's another contemplation. And the contemplation is this: in many ways, it is of no consequence for the progress of human life whether it is oneself that is able to do something, or whether it is others that are able to. That's really interesting contemplation. And it's followed by this second step. It says, recall the moment when you had a resolution to perform a deed of love. Now enkindle that moment within you to an intensified experience of love, warmth, and sincerity. I'll read that again. Recall a moment when you had a resolution to perform a deed of love. Now enkindle that moment within you to an intensified experience of love, warmth, and sincerity. Now, you will probably be able to understand for yourself from the experience a contemplation that happens to hold up our brain thinking is a very different inner exercise to work with than a contemplation that helps us to understand some of the lawfulness of life. Or an exercise, which is the second part, that gives us an insight into love. The first one is working in a way which brings us into realms of the spiritual world eventually and allows us to receive these insights in our own individualized thinking. The second one brings us into a different capacity to bear our karma, to work with our destiny, and therefore has a totally different result that it bears on the soul if we enter into that contemplation. And that's a really interesting thing to contemplate, that as far as human progress is concerned, it doesn't matter whether it's myself or someone else can do something. It does a whole lot of things to the inner world when you contemplate that. It can overcome all sense of competitiveness. It can allow us to have experiences of deep joy in someone else's deeds. In a way, it comes from that picture of Thomas Aquinas, who said, every truth, no matter who utters it, comes from God. Because you recognize that if someone can do progress, progress is occurring. But it also gives that sense of freedom. Do I choose to be the one that steps into this task that's being asked? Do I choose that? Many things are revealed to us through these exercises that bring us in such a deeper relationship to the spiritual world. There's a Sufi poet, Hafiz, who Goethe said the West must have Hafiz, translated him for the West. And there's a little part of one of his poems that says, every time you say God's name, dear pilgrim, my ears wish my head was missing so they could finally kiss each other and applaud all your glorious wisdom. Because how extraordinary it is when you hear the truth coming through someone, when something living in the spirit comes through them. It brings us all joy. It's very different from the world we've created now, where we compete and we're jealous and there's envy and there's strife and there's difficulty. To find this other aspect of our soul life So depending on your trials, depending on what's affecting you in your biography, depending on what your destiny and your karma brings to your plate, you might need to work a little bit differently inwardly. But it's always useful to work with some of the archetypes and know that at least you're aware that the inner work is essential and it will bear fruit, not only for your own relationship to the spiritual world, but what can come in and through you towards the task that you carry. I think we're about out of time. I did put out an invitation on the 12th of November. You're all invited to an open talk called I Will Make My Way to the Spirit Come Hell or High Water. That's with Educare Do, which is where Seamus and Megan's track on the living arts, speech and drama as the living arts is available, and also my track on inner development for world development is available if you're interested in looking into those things. But the lecture's open and free to all. I Will Make My Way to the Spirit Come Hell or High Water, a great title for the times that we're in. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for the presentation and for the talk. And thank you very much, Megan and Seamus, for the presentation. That was wonderful, not only to talk about this, but really have an experience for all of us. Thank you so much. We are really almost out of time. So maybe this time, if there is not an urgent question, or maybe you can write remarks into the chat, I would suggest we close it right now. Just stay with it as it has been. Thank you very much, Lisa. Next week, the 8th of November, we will have Melanie Guerra from Brazil. She's in Sao Paulo with us, and she's going to talk about the curriculum as a dialogue. So something which might refer a bit to what Martin Rawson also spoke about, the question of the curriculum, and I'm looking forward to that. Thank you again, Lisa, for that wonderful talk, and I wish you all the best. Have a good day, a good night, and wherever you are, all the best for you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks.